This clip is brought to you by SaveWithConrad.com.
It's a sad end to this wrestling dream and his run with Crush. Let's get to the bad news. August 13th, 2007, Adams is found unconscious by his wife, and he later dies at their Tampa home. The medical examiner concludes that the cause of death was a result of mixing painkillers with a muscle relaxer and a sedative, and the coroner determines that the drugs in his system were individually at therapeutic levels, but their combination impedes his respiratory system enough to kill him at just 43 years old. Man, this is a sad, tragic tale that we're probably all too familiar with in wrestling. How did you hear the news, and what do you remember the reaction being when you find out you lost former superstar, just 43 years old?
Well, you got the information out of Tampa, obviously. Big news there. A lot of talents did and still do live in the Tampa St. Pete area. People like that fact there's no state tax in Florida. You can save a couple of shekels. And of course, it made the wire service. The death of a quasi-famous 43-year-old athlete is a headline. And of course, him being associated with WWE, even though he's also in WCW at times, it was a WWE story. I thought more than anything in that regard, as far as perception was concerned. It was sad, found by your wife dead. I've always found it ironic that the wrestler's preference seems to be in that era, the downers. Everything he mentioned that was in his system's a downer.
Yeah.
And then if you mix a little booze with it, it increases the effectiveness or the risk in this case, obviously. So it's always tried to tell me that when guys are habitually on the downers, Xanax, pain pills, you can get an excuse for all of it. I got a fear of flying. I got a separation anxiety from my family. I have latent guilt because I'm not home from my little girl's recital. I got a bad shoulder. I got a bad neck. I got bad. So you go to various doctors and get what you specifically need to add to your lethal combination. And I always wondered about that because it just tells me that the talent was just not happy with their life. They weren't happy with themselves. There was something else that was much more important than wrestling, which unfortunately sometimes along the way, talents don't characterize it as such, that wrestling is everything. And that's another bad thing. That's why I never have big issues with giving talents days off, Conrad, because they needed to resume some sort of normalcy in their life to have some balance. And I always also, in part of my pitch to talents to come to sign, what are you going to do if you don't make it? What are you going to do if you don't make it? And because what you see is talents getting all these chances. I've seen this time and time again. They get all these chances and they're not making it. They're not getting advanced. And then all of a sudden, they realize that what I'm doing isn't good enough. And my lifelong dream to be a star in the pro wrestling business looks like it's not going to be attained. So they start taking shortcuts. And sometimes those shortcuts involve masking their feelings, suppressing their emotions, and things of that nature. So I think Brian may have been a victim of some of that. At least that's my assumption. But I always remember him as the guy out of the ring, the guy backstage, the guy in the locker room area, all that stuff. Because he was a cool, funny guy to talk with. He had a great sense of humor, and he was very likable. And he always put himself, he made you feel special when you were talking with him. I didn't feel special the day that I brought him and Clark in to talk about going to Cincinnati. He was not happy. Now, they weren't threatening, oh, we ought to kill you. No, nothing. Come on. It was just the fact that normal circumstances, Brian Adams was a genuinely nice guy who had great friends in the business for the right reasons. And that's the guy I choose to remember, not the guy that never lived up to his physical stature and his physical abilities. the guy that was a good human being, which at the end of the day, Conrad, is a whole hell of a lot more important than being a great worker. Much more important.
We should mention that his name would pop up in that whole Signature Pharmacy scandal. Apparently he received some drugs from them in 2006, and his name would pop up with the Dr. Aston cases again. And I think he even, it was on record that he referred Kidman there. So lots of moving parts when it comes to drugs and Bryan Adams towards the end of his life. You know, when you take a look at what he accomplished, he was, tag champ a couple of times in WCW with Brian Clark as Chronic. And of course he started with the company in the WWF as a tag champ with, Demolition. And, you know, as far as gimmick accolades go, I mean, he did well in the Pro Wrestling Illustrated PWI 500s, even though Meltzer would say, oh, he's one of the worst. In 93, I think he finished 35th. But when it came to the Observer, he won some less than stellar accolades. Worst worked match of the year in 01, with his match against Kane and the Undertaker at Unforgiven, which we talked about, which was his last match. And worst feud of the year in 97 versus Los Boricuas. And it's just a shame that this is a guy who was so well liked by his peers. I mean, we often hear, you know, people refer to the Undertaker as almost like the real life godfather of wrestling. And, Savage was such a standoffish person and a private person and maybe a little paranoid. And, you know, a lot has been documented about that, but they both saw something in him and really loved him, and he was important to both of them. And I know that Bruce has told me before that, the real life Undertaker, Mark Calloway, was devastated with this news of his friend leaving so early. It's such a shame, man. What could have been.
So many stories about wrestlers, at least in my time, since I've been making a living at it since 1974, can end that way. What could have been, and what should have been with Brian was never achieved. And it's not for the lack of trying from the office. Yeah, we can look back. This is a bad booking, and this was never going to work. But look how it started out. You know, and when you're getting in the company, and you get a chance to work Madison Square Garden, WrestleMania 10, with a Hall of Fame guy like Randy Savage, one of the greatest of all time, in bell to bell, without question. You're given opportunities. He got a lot of TV exposure. It just didn't pan out for him. And sometimes then we hold that against a person as individually because they got all these opportunities and it didn't make it work. Well, that's not the way to look at it, in my opinion. I judge a man by how he treats me. I judge him by how he treats others and what I observe. And Bryan Adams certainly always treated me respectfully. And as far as I know, again, as I said early in this podcast today, he was one of the most popular guys in the locker room. He made guys laugh. He was a loyal friend. And it doesn't surprise me that Undertaker took that. So I remember it. Bruce would have known more about how, because Bruce was more personal with Taker than me at that point in time. We became that way over time and are today. But Taker just, I would say this, Crush is like a brother to Taker, a family member. And he tried to help his family. And he reached out time and time again to pull him back up. It just never worked. And I think that Taker, when he found out that Bryan had the accidental overdose at 43 years of age, that Taker probably at that point in time felt, I didn't do enough. I should have done more. And golly, Conrad, we can all think of that with people, in our lives in one form or another, that I wish I'd have called that guy one more time. I wish I'd returned this message, whatever. And so it just gives us the reason, especially in today's virus era, touch base with people, text them. If you don't feel like calling them and interrupting, just text them. Touch base. Let them know you're thinking about them in a positive way. And so I just think Taker felt like he had not done enough. But in reality, he had done plenty. Had nothing to feel guilty about. All it simply was, he lost one of his best friends at 43. And all of us can put ourselves in those big shoes of the taker and understand how that works. You lose a great friend that young, it is going to adversely affect you without a doubt. So again, my remembrance of Brian Adams, I'd rather remember the guy that was funny in catering and had a great relationship with the boys, and he had a great relationship with everybody on the roster. Sometimes the top guys are the last to come aboard these friendships. In this case, it seemed like the top guys were the first to come aboard on the friendship of Brian Adams because A, they liked him personally, and B, they saw money if everything could get lined up as one of their opponents. And again, the friendship was the most important thing, and that's what affected guys the most.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.